David responded to God in his heart and said, "Your face, O Lord, I shall seek." And then he says, "Don't hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. You have been my help. Do not abandon me nor forsake me." It's interesting. God responds to David in his time of need and says immediately, "I'm here. Ask. What do you need? Seek me. Ask these things. I'm here for you." And David has this moment where it's almost like he steps back a little bit, like he retracts in his faith, where he says, "God, I need you." And then when God shows up, he's like, "Please don't leave. But please don't hide from me. Please don't turn away in anger. You've been my help. Don't abandon me. Don't forsake me." I think that response is actually pretty normal. I've been able to be privileged to share Christ with a lot of people and tell them about what faith in God is according to the Bible. And a lot of times they get to that point and they're thinking about how God is working in their life, and they're thinking about how God has intervened, and they know that God is working in them. And they get right there, and then they get nervous because they're afraid that God's going to leave them. Right? It's kind of like the danger of any relationship. When you open yourself up, when you trust someone fully, there's a chance that you can get hurt in the process. There's a chance that you can be wounded when you're honest, when you have that deep, intimate relationship with somebody. And that's why marriages so often fall apart, because people misuse that trust and that hurt happens. We're all a little gun shy. We're all just waiting for that other shoe to drop. I think that's where David's at right here. And he has good reason. David has good reason for feeling like he is feeling right now. Now, it's not true about God. He doesn't need to worry about God abandoning him. And yet he says it because he has been abandoned. "Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. You have been my help. Do not abandon me or forsake me, O God of my salvation, for my father and mother have forsaken me." This is some of the questions that were asked up there on the video that we played. Were people saying, "Where are you? Because my life is horrible. I've lost my mother and my father. I want God to bring them back. Why did my brother die? This or that. Why is there evil in the world?" All these questions all surround this idea of abandonment. God, where are you? Guy asked that lady, "You think God's listening?" No, I don't think he has his hearing aids turned up. Because if he is listening, then this world's got some problems. He's not doing a very good job, so he must not be able to hear. That's a common conclusion that people have because of this feeling of abandonment, that God is just letting the world go into chaos. And most of the time it's from personal experience. David says, "My father and my mother have abandoned me, have forsaken me." I can't imagine how hard that would be. I have two wonderful parents who have invested in my life. I want to be a wonderful parent to my son. I love my son. I can't imagine abandoning your children, but it happens all the time. Sometimes you get the feeling of abandonment when a loved one dies. It wasn't anything to do with them choosing to leave, and yet sometimes we can take that anger and turn it towards God because God was the one that took them from me. One of the other things that was said in that video. These feelings of abandonment cause us to doubt God and cause us to assume that even if we open ourselves up to God, that God is going to leave us in the dirt, that he's not going to be there for us when we need him. And it's tough to engage in that trust relationship with God. I think people experience this all the time. I think David experiences this because he knows that God is going to be gracious. He knows that God has answered him because He says, I'm going to seek you. And then he gets nervous and says, don't hide from me. Don't turn away from me. Don't abandon me or forsake me. Because he has this issue that happened in his life. His human experience has been abandonment. For my father and my mother have forsaken me. So this is the fourth thing. Right? What to do when you've been abandoned. Right? Cry out to God. Remember that God is gracious and he shows mercy. Commit to seeking the Lord. And finally, remember that God wants you. He wants to save you and he wants to take you up. Right? Look at that last verse. For my father and my mother have forsaken me, but the Lord will take me up. I love that phrase, take me up. It's actually gather, right? So most of the time it's used for harvesting in the wheat, right? You're gathering in all of the individual stalks, and then you're going to harvest those things. Or to assemble all of the people together in a town or a community, right? The intent of the word is to gather up all the essential pieces. And I think sometimes we find ourselves broken and we find ourselves shattered in life. And this word means that God gathers up the pieces of our life. That he picks up those remnants of your shattered heart, of your shattered life. I love that imagery. God wants you. That's how we know that we can trust God, is because he loves us. The Bible is full of passages that talk about God's love for us. And yet so often we're hesitant to trust him. We're hesitant to put our faith in him. We're hesitant to take that leap of faith or that step of faith, whatever you want to call it. We're hesitant to give God the ability that could possibly wound us. And so we shy back a little bit. You're not going to leave me, right? You're not going to turn away from me, right? You're not going to hide your face from me, right? And the truth is, God will not. And David says that. But, right? Stop. It's actually different than that. Buts are so important in the Bible. My father and my mother have forsaken me. God, don't leave me. Don't abandon or forsake me, O God of my salvation. But the Lord will take me up. There's no uncertainty when David writes this line, right? He knows that God wants him. He knows that God wants to save him. O God of my salvation. He knows that he wants to gather him up, the remnants of his life. I know there are many people who have a lot of baggage that they bring to God. It's a safe place to bring your baggage. God gathers up the broken pieces of your life and he puts you back together, knits you back together. I love that picture of God knitting us and reshaping us and making us into the thing that he desires us to be. I have a friend that says people are like pots, pots with flowers and stuff, and when they break, they shatter, clay pots, they're just in tons of different pieces. One of the jobs that I used to do was putting out Christmas decorations around the campus for the school that I worked at, and there was all these nativity scenes, and some of these were very unique and from all over the world. And there was this one nativity scene from Ecuador, and I don't remember who it was, but somebody brought it into my office in pieces because they had bumped the table and it got knocked over, and so they brought these pieces and they laid them on my desk, and they had carefully gathered them up together, and so I called one of the maintenance guys, an older gentleman named Andy, and Andy worked to re-glue it back together, and it had all these little cracks and lines, but it was one of a kind, and everything, and he put it back together. And my friend, he said, people are like pots. When they're broken and they're shattered, God can put them back together, but they're full of cracks after they're mended. But he says that's not a bad thing. It just means that God's light can shine through them all the more. I always love that. That the difficulties in our life, the painful things that have happened, the broken pieces, God can put those things, gather them up, put us back together, and then use what has gone on in our lives to shine a light so that people can see, to be filled with love and joy and faith. And some of the people who have been through the hardest circumstances in life, I have found that they are some of the most loving people. They are some of the most wonderful people to be around because they have been through hardship and been through pain and been through suffering, and yet God has gathered them up and put them back together, and light shines through all of those broken cracks, right? All of those places that aren't quite matched together perfectly. And they become even more beautiful.
Increases empathy.
And absolutely. And so that's how God is working for us in our lives. When we feel abandoned, the truth is this last line of David, the Lord will take me up. It doesn't matter what I feel. It doesn't matter that I feel like God's going to turn his back on me, that I feel like God's going to abandon me, that he's going to become angry with me because I keep doing the wrong things. It doesn't matter, because the truth is here at the very end of verse 10. But the Lord will take me. He'll lift me up. He'll gather me up. He wants to save us. He wants to gather us up in his arms. It's actually one of the words, one of the ways that you can translate that word, to gather up in your arms. You think of the parable of the 99 and the one sheep. Right? Jesus said that the shepherd would leave the 99 for the sake of the one who had a broken leg, right? And so he would lift him up. He would gather him up and put him on his shoulders and walk back to the flock. That's what God wants to do for you and for me. That's what we do when we have been abandoned by others, when we feel like we've been abandoned by God. We cry out to him. We remember that God is gracious. We commit ourselves to seeking the Lord. And we remember that God wants the relationship with us. He wants to save us. He wants to gather us up in his arms, to put back the broken pieces and restore us for his glory.